non-fiction movies are the movies that are not fiction. And usually we think about documentaries when we talk about non-fiction, but per definition it also includes news, reality shows, commercials, and so on. And it is a little bit strange that we define non-fiction by what it is not. And I guess that points to the privileged position that fiction has. It is more or less taken for granted that when you do movies, you do fiction, even though non-fiction is equally important. And let's ask ourselves, what is really non-fiction? It could be seen as representation, that the documentary movie or the non-fiction movie is representing reality. It is something that we see that points to reality, that says something about reality. We could see it as a reflection of reality, that when we see documentaries or non-fiction, we don't really see reality, we see the reflection of reality. Or we can see it as a mediation of reality. Here we have reality, and that reality is mediated through the camera to the viewer. But of course it's important to realize that when you do a documentary, documentaries is not reality. And as John Grierson said, documentaries are a creative treatment of reality. So you kind of take a piece of reality and then you make it into a story. And when you make the piece of reality into a story, a narrative, then you transform it, you manipulate it, and even if you try to make a documentary that is authentic and truthful, you always make it a creative treatment of reality. So maybe you could see a documentary as a kind of crystallization of the essence of reality. And realism is not in the material, but in the essence. And what we mean with that is that, let's say that we make a historical documentary about World War II, for example. Then we might have reenactments with actors that reenacts events that we don't have archive footage from. But that is still counting as a documentary, because the reenactments themselves are not authentic. They are just staged and with actors. But the essence, what happens in the reenactment is more or less true. So the truth lies in the essence of the documentary. Or consider a typical nature show where you show lions stalking animals in the wild, and then you see these lions chasing and then eating an antelope or so. Probably that sequence is shot on different times, so the shots in that sequence doesn't relate to each other actually, but the essence that the lion is hunting the antelope and killing it and eating it, that essence is authentic, even if the images are more or less taken from different environments. Maybe some of them are even shot in a zoo. And it is important to realize that the line between fiction and non-fiction is very blurred. You have documentaries that are trying to be very truthful, the journalistic documentaries. And then you have fiction that are very spectacular and fantastic, like science fiction and fantasy. And I would really count in the typical cop movie in that it is a fiction that is not really realistic. But then, of course, you have all these in-between movies, like the movie Titanic, for example, that was based on a true story, and parts of it was quite authentic. But of course, the love story in Titanic is just made up. Or you have documentaries like the Michael Moore documentaries that are kind of staging events and being provocative. So what is authentic and real in a Michael Moore documentary? And why do we call Michael Moore's documentaries for documentaries while we call Titanic fiction? Even if they are quite close to each other on a kind of continuum between truth and fiction. One way to you can be very pragmatic about the line between fiction and non-fiction. You can actually be so pragmatic that you say that the line between them is whether the movie maker is calling herself a documentarist or not. If the movie maker say that I made a documentary, then it is a documentary. If the movie makers say that this is fiction, then it is fiction. It might sound strange, but it is a quite pragmatic view on it. Another view is that fiction speaks indirectly about reality, while non-fiction speaks directly about reality. Let's say that you're going to make a movie about love or homosexuality. If you make a fiction, you make up characters and you make up events about a homosexual couple, for example. But the essence, what you are trying to say about homosexuality, can be authentic and true in the fiction. But you say it indirectly by inventing characters and events. While in the non-fiction, you actually use real characters and real events from reality. Maybe you do an interview with people and so on. So then you speak directly about the essence of homosexual love, for example. Another way of dividing it is that fiction, when you write fiction, a script for fiction, the essence is predetermined. You know in advance what you want to say. Maybe you want to say that homosexuality is very difficult because it's difficult to get accepted in society or so. Then that essence is predetermined. When you make a documentary, you can start out the documentary work with an open mind and then discover things, discover the essence. Maybe you find in the interviews that, well, being a homosexual in our modern society is not so very difficult. And then the essence is post-determined. You find the essence during the making of the movie.